Alright, today's lesson is going to cover a few more features inside of the Mesh motion graphics system built into Maya. Really amazing system for making these instanced objects that you can apply different dynamic forces to. We're going to go over a couple of the kind of beginner to intermediate forces, the different features that you can add to a mesh network, and you can go a lot deeper than this, but this should help get you started. All right, so what you're seeing here, just to give you an example of what I'm talking about. So we'll get to this in a minute. This is using a signal object applied to the mesh network, to a mesh distribute network. So we're gonna kind of, how did I get there, right? All right, well, let's start. Let's go ahead and start a new scene here. And just in case, when you start your new scene, don't forget you might be in like modeling and standard mode here. Go ahead and switch your window set here up in the top left to FX and change up in your workspace, and let's go down to Mesh. Just gives you, an easier way to kind of view everything and get access to your timeline and all that. All right, so I'm going to just do what I had before. I'm going to add a cube to my scene. Easy to see it because we can see it when it's rotating and everything like that. We could obviously use any geometry you want, but the more geometry you add, the more processing power we're talking about. So keep that in mind. Not that you have to use super simple objects, but just keep in mind you better have some rendering power, GPU access, if you go to animate these and render them in the future. All right, so first thing we're going to do is create a mesh network. I'm going to come up to the Mesh tab, and over here on the far left we can see is create a mesh network. I have the cube selected, and boom, right off the bat it's defaulting into a radial distribution. So you can see here's the nodes we're going to start exploring. In this lesson we're going to explore, let's see, we're going to do the random, we're going to do the signal, the spring, we can even look at the replicator. We're going to look at transform, and very briefly a quick look at flight, although flight could be a lesson all to itself. And then I'm going to also show you how to convert the mesh to a geometry if you want to, if you just want to take a rendered still, or maybe you want to modify it after the fact. All right, so in an earlier lesson we talked about mesh and the mesh distribute. We have radial, spherical. Just to see these a little bit better, I'm going to up the number of points. There's that spherical, so you can kind of see it a lot better when we get like 100 points going, how it's distributing all those cubes into a spherical form. Some of these are a little bit more advanced. We've got the grid, which we're actually going to use a lot of. So grid is really nice. You can decide, first of all, how far away do I want to space these, and then how many in the grid do I want to have. So maybe 7 by 7 by 7. Now I've got a really nice tight grid of objects to work with, which is cool. I'd actually probably move these out a little more, like 15 by 15 by 15, just to give them a little breathing room, right? So yeah, there's more in here. We're not going to go over all of these right now, but we can definitely play around with radial versus linear. So see, I didn't have those. If I spread them out, then you can kind of see that really nice system that it's creating there. And we also have like Z offset if I want to turn that into more of like a helix or something like that, which is kind of fun. What angle do I want to fall at? Maybe I want to go 720 and get a full spiral going. So you can have a lot of fun with these, but for right now we'll start off playing with a grid. Alright, so this has created an instance. So there's the original cube, it's hidden, and it's created all these instances of that cube, which is cool. Keep in mind, you can, under Mesh, when you go to create a Mesh network up here, if you hit that dialog box, you can choose between an instancer, or do you want to have copies, actual geometry meshes. So the instancer is a lot less on processing power, but I do know that at least one instance where you might want to do the mesh is if you wanted to add individual textures to all these different objects. And you could do that through a procedural kind of code-based process, or if you want to be super tedious and do them all individually. So that would create individual objects, but again, a whole lot more processing power. So for the most part, we're going to stick with instances, and then it lets you choose between all these different distribution types again. But I'm going to close that for right now because we've already got one made. So we've got our MASH instancer going on right now, which is cool. I'm going to go ahead and click on MASH here, and let's take a look. I think maybe the first one we should take a look at is random. So we're going to go ahead and click on random and add a random note. You can see already that perfectly aligned cube has now been randomized a little bit, which is fun. And actually, you know what? I'm going to add a color to this real quick. So I'm going to unhide that and right click on it and add a new material just so we can see this a little bit better. Let's get a nice bright color. There we go. You can see I did it to the original cube and it sends it out to all the instances, and then I'm going to hide that original cube so we don't have it just like floating there in the middle. Alright, cool. So let's go back to the MASH here. So we added the randomizer to it, which is cool. And if you want to see where that went, a really easy way, because I have the MASH instancer and the MASH tab there. Up here, not the button to make the MASH network, but the next one over, this brings up this MASH editor. Really convenient way to just kind of see what all you've added to the scene. So there's my distribute. We've already done that one where we created the grid, right? And actually, let me turn on shading. I want to have wireframe unshaded just so you can see all these kind of individual cubes in the scene. But here's that random that we just added. So just easy to bring it back up and get the MASH random to appear, because sometimes these things kind of disappear from your attributes and you don't know quite how to access them again. So again, I can play around with the position of all these. I could spread out the X, I could spread out the Y. I can play around with the strength of the randomization. And when you do get into animation, all of this can be animated as well, which is kind of fun. You can start to see how you'd already start to create some really neat animations out of that. The step strength, you can have it actually go from one to the next, and kind of almost like a wave pattern that goes through it from random to not randomized back to random again, which is kind of fun. So yeah, you've got a random seed to control the randomization, how do you want it to calculate the randomness, because random isn't really random, it's an algorithm, and you have a seed number that generates the random quality to it. So you can also randomize scale on this and get some really neat effects that way if you want to. You can randomize rotation. Now you can start to see, whoa, crazy Jenga pile going on there. So yeah, you can get some really cool visual effects starting to go on just by playing with these different randomized features. Let's see. Yeah, and it's not limited to just the grid. I could do this on any of these. I could do it on a radial pattern. There's back to that crazy spiral that I had going on. There's a linear again, kind of setting them all off. So there's more in here you can play around with. You can assign them to a volume, to an actual shape, all sorts of fun stuff. But I'm going to go back to the grid. All right. And maybe I will go back to the random here. I'm just going to dial in a little bit of the scaling just so we can kind of see this a little bit better. I'll keep some of the rotation in there. I think that's kind of fun. Now, as we come down, we already looked at strength. Falloff Object is pretty fun to play around with. So if you right click on that and create, this is something you can start to animate in the future, or you can just use it as a kind of control feature. So you can see I now have a Falloff object, and if I go to my position, it has this cage to it, right? And here it is over here on the right, the attributes to it. I have kind of a inner zone and an outer zone, so I can scale the whole thing up if I want to and make it bigger or smaller. And you'll see it's this zone of influence that brings the randomization in. So you can start to see how this could be really powerful in an animation as I move this through. Let me actually get a better angle on it. You can see it's actually creating the randomization as it passes through it. Really cool for animating the position then of that Falloff object that's coming through, right? And there's a lot of different features here of what you can do. You can make it go through the object. You can play around with the shape of it, whether it's a sphere or a cube shape. And it's where does it start at full strength as the inner cube, and then it fades off to 0 strength as you get to the outside. So that's why they give you the the like inner zone size versus the outer zone size. So you kind of have a gradient of influences as it passes by, which is kind of fun. I'm going to scale this whole thing down just a little bit more. There we go, just so we can get a more dramatic kind of pass through. Have it come to the front here so we can see it. Actually, I'm going to scale that up just a little bit more than that. There we go. There we go. There, it looks pretty good. All right, and you can play around with normal mode, which is just like where it is right now. It goes back to normal as it passes out. And then add, I believe, is supposed to kind of like, yeah, it freezes it, which is really cool. Isn't that neat? Like it goes through, but then it like keeps it. So it's kind of like it's like broken it as it goes through, right? Now, hard to undo that after the fact. So I'm going to just see if I can. There we go. I'll undo. And then I think remove kind of removes it as it passes back through. There we go. So that's kind of fun thinking about that way of like having one come through and add that randomization, like kind of crashes through and leaves it in place like it busted down a wall or something, and then remove it at will with a remove object and then bring that back through again. So some really cool kind of like sweeping wipes that you could do. You could think in motion graphics of breaking some things apart and bringing them back together again, typography or different objects in your scene. And you can play with a ramp of that, fall off, you know, all that fun stuff as well. So I like to show that Mash Random has that fall off shape capability in it, right? All right. Now we'll also add a spring to this because it'll give it kind of like a bounce as it goes. So actually, oh, let me take that back to normal just so it kind of, it's very linear right now. It's like snap, 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 you know, as it goes through it. But let me move this back just a little bit more. There we go. And if you bring a spring object into this, so go to the Mash instancer there, and we're going to go to spring right here and add spring. This should have a little bit more of an easing of that motion as it passes through instead of being so linear. So again, let me grab this guy. See how everything kind of like bounces back now? It's got like a nice little dynamic kind of spring-like quality. Even if I go really fast, it's got a little like jiggle bounce to it, which is really fun. So again, these guys have like more of a flexibility now to them. Let's scale this guy up a little bit. You see it happen to the whole thing. There we go. You can really kind of see it as I pass it through. That little bit of boing, 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 boing. Sorry, I add sound effects to everything if I can. Let's see. Let's keep going. So from here, I'll keep that object right now. You can see I'm kind of adding in. What's cool on this Mash editor too is if there's anything you want to turn off, like if I don't like the spring, I can just toggle that off, and now it'll go back to that very linear boom, boom, boom. But if I want to bring the spring back, I can bring it back and get that nice jiggle back again. Okay, so let's play around a little bit more, and let's bring a signal in. So signal is really fun. Signal allows you to kind of add more of a algorithmically generated pattern. So I'm going to add a signal node now. And what's cool is the signal allows you to kind of like bring in your timeline. So default right now it's on 4D noise, which is the first signal type. So I'm going to take my timeline to the beginning, and there you go. You can see it's actually kind of like, you know, got this little four-dimensional 4D, fourth dimension being time, so XYZ plus time, and it's giving you this kind of fun motion to it. Now I've got 120 frames in there. Let's up that up to like 200. And now we can start to play a little bit. So I'll let that bounce back and forth. Obviously I can play with like X dimension, like where I want it to happen. So way more or way less. It can like jiggle those down so it's only moving a little bit, the amount of distance that it's going, or I can have it going like really far, or I can bring in the Z depth and have it bouncing forward and back. I can have it rotate, so they've got kind of like a rotating jiggle to them instead of just the position moving. I can even have them scale. Now we're getting kind of a crazy kind of cluster vibe to it, right? That's kind of fun. I'm going to bring these back down a little bit and just have it moving. The other thing that I can do, let me give this just a little bit more range to play with, is I can bring in the trigonometry steps, like how much do I want it to go? Do I want it to be, it's kind of affecting the equation a little bit, how much noise is in it, like whoa, that's a really noisy looking image now, bring that down. Now we have a little bit smoother kind of feel to it. And the time scale, like I can make it really nice and slow now. That little flash you're seeing is just because my 200 frames goes by pretty quick. Let's up this to like 1,000 frames. Let it play a little longer. There we go. You can see it's getting this really nice trigonometry 4D noise vibe going on to it. And you also have strength, like, just how much do you want it to move? If you want to just move it a little bit, do you want to bring in a randomization to the strength? All of that fun stuff. You can also take enable step off, and it's sort of like, still has a jiggle, but it's like, instead of doing it with like every single object, it's kind of doing them with all of them moving together. So this can have a nice subtle effect to it. I could spread these apart a bit more and get that more of that like sort of like dynamic system shift instead of the like randomized noise shift. Like that's kind of a cool view on that, right? As they're all shifting up and down, kind of like a wave-like feature. So don't forget under the trig settings there that enable step versus each of them kind of like being these little independent items. Then that makes them all kind of like move and shift together. I'm going to enable step back again. Let's see a couple of these other signal types other than 4D noise. We have looping noise, which, let me stop this and start it over again. Whoop. Hold on. I might not have enough. Enable step. I'm not sure why that one's not moving. Might be, no, not scale. Well, let's try a couple of these other ones. There we go. There's fractional Brownian motion. Let's go ahead and bring some of these step amounts back up. There we go. I think my noise scale was too low on a couple of those. There we go. That's a nice kind of flex going on. Again, if I take off enable step, that one actually doesn't affect that one as much. Let's see if looping noise comes back. There we go. It's moving a little bit more. Looping noise, I think, really wants that noise scale. That makes sense. So I just didn't have enough of the noise scale turned up the first time. There, we're getting some nice motion now. And there's, if I enable step on that, that makes it all move as one. So that one doesn't really work as well with enable step going. So you want to really get the motion going on that one. And then we have trigonometry. Whoa. Let's slow that amount down quite a bit. Maybe the strength of that one way down. Get a nice little fluid motion going. And if I enable step again, yeah, enable step works better on some than others. And bring that one back. And then last but not least, curl noise. And this one, let's bring the noise scale just up a bit more and the strength back up. There we go. That's fun. And if I enable step, take that off on that, I believe they kind of like bounce into each other. They have a little bit, am I seeing that right? I think they get like more of a collision state on that particular one. So you can really have some fun with this, and let's see what happens if I take my, I don't think I can do it while it's in motion, but I was trying to get back to my random fall off. No, it won't do it while it's animating. Yeah. I could have that happen though, and then let's see what happens while that's in the middle of it. Yeah, I don't know. They're kind of interfering with each other. I think the signal and then that random fall off aren't quite triggered the same way together, but still, just wanted to check it out and see if that would work for you. Move that back out. So, the signal is one of my favorites. You can do a whole lot with it. Definitely have some fun. And then let's take a look at adding a transform to this. So I'm going to take my instancer. Transform is going to allow me to kind of move my whole scene around the position of this mesh network. So if I want to, I could type in 5, and you can see I can move it along the x-axis. I could go to 50 and move it way off. I'll take that back to like 10. But a better way to do this is adding a controller null. So if you go up to create and you come down to a locator, it's just kind of like an empty little locator object. And if you use the middle click on your mouse, if I actually click back on the transform and I middle click this locator, I can drag it over and drop it onto, oh, hold on one second. There we go. Let's bring it back. Mash transform. There we go. There we go. Now I got it. And I drop it on. Now I have a locator object. And this object actually allows me to freely move around my mesh network now. So just a really nice feature. I like that way more than having to sit there and type in exact coordinates of where I want it to go. Now I actually have a form that I can play around with, and I can scale it, and I can rotate it, and do all sorts of things with it. So I can actually animate the whole cluster and move it around. So that transform with using a locator object, I think, really comes in handy, right? Let's see, let's do one more thing here. Let's do the instancer, and then I can also, I believe I can replicate that and add a replicator and make like, whoa, you know, I can make a whole lot of replicated objects. You know, these are all instances still, but let's do like 20 of them and play with some of their positioning in a fun way. So if I get that going. Now, this is really trying my computer processor power right now, so obviously I've crawled to a halt. But it's just another way of continuing to duplicate things and make more instances so the replicator can continuing to copy and do all sorts of fun stuff in multiple dimensions. I'm going to go ahead and turn that replicator off. I think the last thing, I will show you flight for a second, but I'm going to go ahead and just kind of get rid of a few of these other guys that we don't need. I don't want flight plus signal plus all this other stuff. So I'm going to, each of these you can right click and just delete them as well. So I'm going to go ahead and delete a few of these extra nodes. And let's get rid of the replicator. Okay. So now we're back to our old school original here. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of my Falloff mesh too because I don't really need it anymore. I don't need that locator anymore. And this guy on the distribute, or I'm going to go ahead and reduce this down a bit. All right, cool. And let's go ahead. Oh, I'm actually meant to reduce the numbers there, not that. There we go. That'll work. So now I can do this, and I'm going to go ahead and add a flight just so you can see it. We're just going to scratch the surface on the flight node. And this is a really fun one. I'm going to go ahead and hit just play on it. And you can see it's actually got like a flocking algorithm using like Boids and all of these beautiful algorithmically generated sort of like flocking flight. I mean, this has sort of like a little insect vibe to it right now. But you can really play around and use these different parameters and create some really unique effects, right? So pretty fun what's possible. You can make these things search around in the distances and fly around. You know, you can spend a lot of time in flight, and I do recommend looking into a few other, like there we go, I'm just getting like a little buzz around a light there just by playing around with some of these speed and mass and steering force controls on it. But you can still get some really interesting stuff. And to say I liked what I got there, I had like a flock of birds or a little buzz of insects or whatever I like. What's cool is I can go to my, and this is not just with flight, this would work with any of the ones that I'm working with. Say I want to freeze this to geometry, convert the MASH system to geometry. I can choose the instancer in my outliner, and I can come up to MASH, and I can go to utilities, and I can say bake instancer to objects. And this little window comes up, and I can say bake this frame or bake the whole animation. I'm going to just say bake this frame. And very easily now, you'll see I actually have, I can close these up now, I actually have that whole system of all these individual objects now, which is great. And this is actual geometry that I can play around with. And you know, the original MASH is still there, at least the instancer is there right now. And yeah, I still have the MASH system going. And but now I have, like, you know, individual geometry. If I open that up, that's a group that has all the individual cubes. They're all in the position that MASH made for me, and then I could do whatever I want from there. You know, now as individual objects, I could give them different textures. I could, you know, continue to model them. I could start playing with brush tools. I mean, these are just cubes, but if there's something more advanced. So just in case you ever want to convert those back to geometry and not have them just in this like dynamic motion system, that's how you do it. All right, I'm going to stop there. That's my second lesson, my sort of intermediate lesson on MASH. A more advanced one in the future, we'll come back and look at, like the music simulator system, a couple other things, but this should keep you busy for a while. So thanks for tuning in.